Gloucester witch sometime in early colonial America, 17th century. Witches had a rough time back in those days. So many, particularly elderly ladies, were persecuted as possessing the black magic and being responsible for all the guilt of the community, it would seem. And I wonder how witches fare these days. Perhaps the most celebrated witch alive today is certainly in the English-speaking world, is Sybil Leek, our guest this morning. And The Jackdaw and the Witch is her most recent book, A True Fable. Sybil Leek, back in those days, witches were persecuted. Today they write books.
They are also persecuted, I'm
How?
sorry to say. Well, you know, there are more ways of killing a goose than by wringing its neck. And nowadays, the witches certainly are a much better wicked, shall we put it, than she was a couple of 100 years ago. But there are still the persecutions of the ignorant. You know, a man who does not understand will turn on his neighbor.
Well, let's talk a little about this. The matter of the witch, then, is the stranger, isn't she?
Yes.
I say she because we'll talk about male
Yes.
witches in a moment, too.
The witch is the stranger because it is really very much easier to be in the herd than grazing alone on the other side of the fence. And this is what the witch has always had to do throughout the ages. But in the ways, if I may give you an example of how a witch may be persecuted today, I have recently come to live in America. I intend to make this my home. I've emigrated. But in Britain, I was quite well known, I may almost say famous in several spheres, including radio and television, as a writer. I also had a very, very flourishing antique business, which, when the lease ran out, my landlord said, "Sybil, renounce witchcraft and the lease will be renewed." And I had a terrible temptation, because here was I with two boys to bring up, elderly mother and elderly aunt, and suddenly I'm faced with this in the 20th century. And so I came to America.
We have this phrase, don't we? Witch hunt.
Yes.
When we hear this is connected with political dissenters, certainly throughout history, and I imagine religious dissenters.
Oh,
too.
yes.
Witch hunt.
Of course.
So the word does have connotations, doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, what is? Suppose we ask before we ask you about the jackdaw and the witch, in particular jackdaw named Hotfoot Jackson. You say you renounce witchcraft. What is witchcraft?
I was known all over Europe as the leader of witchcraft, all through the time when the witchcraft laws were not repealed. You know, they were not repealed.
Were there witchcraft laws?
Oh, yes, until 1951. I helped to get them repealed, because there are many archaic laws which should not be there. But nobody really worried too much about me. I was on very friendly terms with the community and the outside community. But the word witch in America has very different connotations than in Europe. As I say, nobody bothered about this, except people who were a little worried about anything, like my landlord. You know, if a coloured person had walked through our village street, he would have sworn that we were being invaded by Africans. His mind was so prejudiced and twisted. And the fact that I had held a shawl, I see a parallel.
Yes,
that the mind which will, seek revenge on a witch will also seek it in anything that it does not understand. And this is why I lecture extensively on witchcraft and psychic phenomena, because I think once we get to an understanding, then we release fears.
You said witchcraft and psychic phenomena. So you connect witchcraft today. Then you would be a euphemism, would it not, for psychic phenomena?
Not exactly, no, because one can be interested in psychic phenomena without adopting the religion of witchcraft.
Oh, what is the religion of witchcraft?
The religion of witchcraft is a belief in a universal mind, a supreme being from which all forces of life come, and which by a process of reincarnation all forces of life go back. The difficulty, of course, occurs in the fact that witches do believe that there can be a manipulation of events in this world helped by the outside world. And, of course, this is occultism, probing in the unknown, the mystique and the mysterious.
So
and the fear is there.
Fear too. You believe you believe in reincarnation. This has
Most
to be one of the
emphatically,
aspects of
yes,
it, doesn't it?
yes.
Well, what were you?
I don't know.
What do you think you were?
I really don't know. I've said we once made a tape that went back about 550 years, and it seemed that I was always involved in some form.
You said the tape went back to 500.
Yes, in the regression under hypnotism, which a parapsychologist did with me some time ago. this tape went past.
Yeah.
A parapsychologist is a psychologist, basically, who goes, para means father, way out, who goes into the realms of the other world as well as this.
And you would be, perhaps more interested, I suppose, in experiments of Dr. Ryan at Duke, wouldn't you?
Well, quite frankly, I was to have the greatest admiration for Dr. Ryan at Duke. I understood all that he was doing when I was 12 years old, and I think we have progressed a long, long way, because he was only involved with experiments in the laboratory. And ESP phenomena does not function at its best in laboratory conditions.
At a rough time with some, perhaps you would describe as skeptics.
Well, skeptics, I love skeptics. Anybody who has anything to say must always meet a skeptic, because ultimately the skeptic either must admit he's a fool or be your best advocate.
You don't mind.
So he can take his choice.
You don't mind then being your, shall we say, fool-skeptic?
Not at all.
All right,
Not at all.
I'll be then. At this moment,
I love the skeptic.
Gadfly. I'll be Gadfly.
Yes, you'll be Gadfly.
So,
but remember the end that Gadfly came to. Lived for 24 hours and had everything. But then there was no more.
I'm going over to
so don't be Gadfly.
The Jackdaw and witches, witchcraft, and myth and legend has always, in folk music, of course, in folk song and folklore, the aspect of the mythic is always powerful there.
But don't you see the myth as always having an element of fact in it? That your folklore always went back to something that was basically a truth at that time, and which over a period of years has, some of the truth has got a little lost, but the basic truth exists always in folklore, folk songs, folk dances. You know, the Watusi, which is so-called modern dance, is an African folk dance. But how many people dance in the Watusi?
The English Morris dance has
of course, yes.
The spring and the growth.
And goes back into witchcraft. The hobby horse dance.
Now, your whole family, you're from a heritage of English witches, aren't you?
But not English witches. Irish and Polish.
Irish and Polish witches. Well, are there differences? This concerned gypsies too? I'm asking
well, yes, the area where I lived in Britain was one of the last strongholds, one of the last strongholds of the the New Forest of Britain, of the last remaining races of real gypsies. I mean, the people who do not live in houses, would not live in houses, have a code of their own, and it is a very dignified code. It may not be our code, but this code works in their race and their tribes. They have a very patriarchal code, and certainly they do understand witchcraft. They understand herbs, they understand healing, and they understand that in witchcraft you have this affinity to nature, this harmonious existence, really, spiritual existence.
Several questions. I spoke of healing. I know it's a phrase that may be rather dangerous. Faith healing is the witch. Does the witch subscribe to medical practice?
No, I do not go to doctors. My sons, Stephen and Julian, I think have never had medicine or vitamin pill in their lives. They're very handsome boys. They have wonderful framework, and they have not had any fads or foibles on diet. They've not been vegetarians or anything like that. They've just had what I call a well-balanced diet.
Well, suppose an accident, just assume for the moment,
Well, I think...
An accident befalls you, hit by a car and the leg is broken, let us say, or fractured. What in that instance?
Well, I think that it is ridiculous not to use, if you wish to, anything that is availing in the century in which you live. I don't think that one should always be archaic in approach to medicine. Take the best of both worlds is really what I have always believed in every way.
I see. But your point is you will not lean on. There's a recent book called The Doctors that
but very few witches, very few witches would be run over by a motor car.
Oh, that's so? How come?
Well, certain precautions would be taken. I heard somebody said the other day to me, "Oh, do be careful." I said, "This isn't my day for being run over by a motor car."
Well, it isn't your day. Now, you have a, what shall we call this? A premonition, but in witchcraft terms it's something else, isn't it?
Well, it is looking into the future. It is seeing future events It is rather manipulating your life around these future events to the best advantage. And this, of course, is a form of magic.
Is there a matter of will involved here?
Certainly, will has to be involved.
Well, how is the will involved if you say it is not your day, then isn't that something preordained?
To a certain extent, I think that one can be pressurized into major events of your life. And it's a moot point whether being knocked down with a car may or may not be a major event. It might be more devastating not to be knocked down with a car and find your house burnt down, your husband left you. You know, which this could have been the worst thing in your life.
Sybil Leek is our guest, the celebrated witch from England. His book is called The Jackdaw and the Witch. The Jackdaw, this is an actual story. You have a jackdaw.
Oh, yes,
How
indeed.
How would you describe a jackdaw? Jackdaw is like a little raven, is that it?
Yes, it belongs to the raven family.
Now, the raven, with its Poe's raven.
Yes, nevermore.
And your jackdaw says evermore, I think.
Well, my jackdaw says quite a lot of things. He says help, and he said nevermore, and he will say Sybil, and then he'll say help again.
What is it about the jackdaw and the raven that makes them so special?
These birds have a very special history. They've always been used in divination. Many people associate the cat with witchcraft, but in Europe the cat was not introduced until the 14th century, when witches had been known for thousands of years before. If you go back into Mexican history, South American history, I'm referring to witchcraft history now, and European history, Egyptian, Byzantine, the bird, and particularly the raven family, have always been highly esteemed in the temples and
the raven
in the world of magic.
Divining qualities?
Yes, they have. There's a special something about these birds. Mr. Hotfoot Jackson,
that's your jackdaw,
the character in The Jackdaw and the Witch, has this, well, more than anything else that I've ever seen or known. He is a very particular bird. He's a magical bird indeed. And I think in the book he comes through as this wonderful, magical character. People are always saying to me, he can't be real, but he is real. And he exists for people to see.
Prentice Hall, of the publishers of this book, how did you, The Jackdaw and the Witch, which you call a true fable?
Yes.
Now, that seems to be
yes, it's deliberate.
A paradox, isn't it?
Yes,
true fable.
It is, because the style of the book is written, almost seems like a fable. This is the point, you cannot believe this jackdaw and its relationship with the boy, my son Julian, can really exist in 20th century life. And so it must be a fable. But then you see, without too much magic, I can say, but here is the boy. Here is the jackdaw, Mr. Hotfoot Jackson. So this is true. It may have a fable quality, but this is a true fable. This is a living legend.
You spoke of your boy. You have two boys. You have
yes.
Julian and
Stephen.
Stephen. I was unaware that witches had families.
Yes, because witchcraft, the knowledge of witchcraft has always been passed down verbally, by word of mouth, in families.
So yours has been a witch family for, for generations?
For at least 500 years that we know of.
Years.
I had a very famous ancestor called Molly Lee, who died about 302 years ago, actually. And she also had a jackdaw. Not exactly a coincidence, I don't think.
Does Molly Lee, do you commune with her on occasion?
No, I don't. I know the legend of her. I've seen the place where she was reluctantly buried. And, of course, the legend is quite interesting.
Well, she was reluctantly buried, you say?
Yes, because there's always some slight difficulty about what to do with the body when a witch is deceased, even in these days. And, nobody wants them in the churchyard, and so they put them right on the edge of the churchyard facing the wrong way. In true Christian generosity, So even in death, they must feel an outcast. But in the case of Molly Lee, this happened, and the local witches, dragged the stones from the forest to her grave and made this wonderful tomb for her, which nobody can move.
So, by the way, you would not be Christian then? No.
No.
Witchcraft is the religion.
Witchcraft is religion. And the fact that one says, I'm always, being misquoted on this, the fact that I do not believe in Jesus Christ as a God who walked on the earth does not mean that I do not see him as one of the great teachers of the time. I really believe that this man was the greatest teacher, but was not, as far as many people are concerned. Newspapers go to town on this. You get lovely headlines, pagan, heathen, and so on. And yet you will find that in most witches, such as myself, there is indeed a very deep religious awareness. It may not be understood, but it is there.
Then, this is interesting, because the first impression of the witch as little kids reading books, whether they be legends or fables, the witch is always, generally she, the woman, has been on it, of evil, is it not?
Yes, it is, but you should also read some Italian fairy stories, where the witch is the beautiful little girl. You know, it varies a little in each country.
So then, in Italian fairy tales, the witch
and in
then
paintings.
is the good fairy.
Yes, and you know there is so little difference between the fairy godmother and the witch, really.
So aren't they both part of the same person,
Of
perhaps,
course,
psychiatrists
yes.
would say?
Because you have 51% good, perhaps, and 49% not so good. And this
reverse
makes up a
it,
person, and that's a razor's edge to be on.
Sort of a spiritual seesaw.
But the point is that witches acknowledge this. We know that the evil is in a good person. But the good person often doesn't believe that he can have any evil in him.
So the witch is really a psychiatrist, isn't she?
The witch has always been in every community, the psychiatrist, the psychologist, the midwife, the doctor, the professional person in the community. And today in the 20th century she is consulted just as much as she was thousands of years ago. You know, politicians from all over the world still beat a path to my door, secretly.
What do they want to find out?
Everything you can possibly
What do you tell them?
think of. I tell them to the best of my ability what I think would be helpful, not always what they want to hear.
Do you tell Harold Wilson about his attitude toward, say, Lyndon B. Johnson? That Harold Wilson, too, is a man? Now, shall we...
And also could be ill.
And our guest is Sybil Leek, who is a very articulate... Witches are always articulate, I take it.
Yes, because they have a little built-in wisdom in them, and the ability to let this wisdom come out. And are not afraid of it coming out.
I suppose what you face most of all, in contrast to the Gloucester Witch, song about whom opened this program, who was physically persecuted. She was perhaps burned or hanged. The persecution you face really is one of people sort of patronizing, or being sort of kidding you, or...
Yes,
the
eternal thing of... did you come in on a broomstick? After the 5 millionth question becomes a little boring if you have got any sort of mind at all.
Yes.
And I certainly feel that I am patronizing these people because I think how little do they know and why have they not progressed a little to learn more?
Then you're not anti-science. As you
Oh,
said
no.
earlier, you use whatever there's...
I think you must use everything. If you're going to... This, I think, is probably why I have earned the name that I have for myself. There are many people who are interested in occultism, witchcraft, mysticism, who are very content to just be that and forget that this world is important. Now, I think if I have this ability, as I know I have and has been proved, to move in another dimension, I must respect that dimension, but also I must be something in this dimension. I must see the beauty in this dimension. I reject nothing in this life. Nothing at all.
So this is a fascinating point here, that there's an impression perhaps of witches in the 20th century is that it's a cop-out, if you know what I mean.
Yes, it's not.
It is certain evangelists who are laying on of hands.
Yes, now,
you don't
it is not. No, now this is one thing that intrigues me, particularly in America, because everyone in America seems to be looking for an escape hatch. And the one thing that witchcraft is not is an escape hatch. It demands of you, and you have to give. And it is no substitute for personal endeavour. But the wonderful thing is that the magic of it all is it helps to extend your horizons. It helps you to be a little more than yourself. It takes you along wonderfully adventurous paths in a much more interesting way. And you've really got one eye in one world and one in the other. And so life is an adventure. You very rarely meet an unhappy witch in the 20th century.
That's a fascinating point. And the witch then perhaps is both a psychiatrist and a poet. I mean, the element, the aspect of poetry.
Because if you're near to nature, if you are close to vital things, real truths, there must be a poetry in you. You know, the first thing I ever had published when I was 16 was a book of poetry. And reviewers didn't understand that this poetry was not really the work of a girl of 16. It had a maturity about it. It was the accumulation of all my family in this poetry. Their eyes were seeing the things. I was just interpreting for 500 generations of witches.
You're talking about 500 generations of witches, and there's not enough. Not you don't mind if I laugh now.
No.
There's not an unhappy witch. You also have a nature about you that's good. This
Yes.
is the opposite of the mythical witch you read about in the fairy tales. And you said, how many witches are there? I mean, has there ever been a census taken of witches in the world?
Well, we're a little nearer to a census at the moment than we've ever been, because there are about 8,000 in Britain. I personally know 800 in America, and I'm talking of authentic witches who understand the principles of the religion. There are about 8,000 in Australia, certainly more than that in Germany. There's a few million scattered around the world, yes. And this is really rather wonderful to think that despite all the persecutions of a minority religion, that this craft, Wicca, the craft of the wise, as we call it in Europe, has survived, despite persecutions and being driven underground.
Is there a driving underground today in certain parts of the world?
No, it is coming much more into the light, and I'm delighted about this. I would like to see it much more into the light in this way. I think the time has come now when the witchcraft rites could be examined by the rest of the world. There's nothing that one should be ashamed of in them, and people would see that within these rites are the elements of the very essence of religion. A very simple, uncomplicated religion that was built for man who was not expected to be God.
Is it possible for you to describe or talk about these rites?
This is the difficulty. This is the verboten part, the forbidden part at the moment, which I fight against myself in witchcraft. But when you think it's only 13 years since the laws were repealed, it's perhaps a little early to expect that the full...
held underground.
Yes,
rites.
the actual rites are still...
You know Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible?
Oh, yes.
And there you recall there was the practice of what... The girls were hysterical.
Yes.
You recall the kinds of black magic, a result of which innocent men and women were hanged for witchcraft, for dissenting. You probably feel unhappy about the play, I would guess.
Yes, I went to the first night of the opera of this in San Francisco, and I did feel very unhappy about this, because it was if, centuries and centuries of injustices were there before my eyes, because of the millions of witches who were hung or burned. Not all of them were witches. Many innocent persons were.
And I meant perhaps unhappy about that because he was equating hysteria too, if you recall.
Yes, well, there is a certain amount. In fact, there is today in the younger element who suddenly wake up one morning and say, goodness me, I've tried everything, LSD, I've thrown up through buses over, now what can I do? Oh, today I'll be a witch. And that can generate a form of hysteria in young people.
It's not authentic witchcraft.
No, this is not, because there's discipline in witchcraft, because you cannot achieve any effects of magic without discipline. The magic is only as good as the operator, and if you're not good, it comes back on you. In the old days, the temple priests who didn't perform their magic properly were flying over the cliff. So they had to be good to survive.
You're talking now, it's interesting, you speak of magic, at the same time you speak of a certain craft of magic, too.
Yes, I do,
magic.
Because I think that in magic is a craft inasmuch there's the technical knowledge involved, the right words at the right time, the right dance at the right time, because dance is very much linked in witchcraft, as it is in anthropology, in the primitive tribes. This was the first expression of emotion, dance, wasn't it?
Yes, so there is a dance involved with
witchcraft.
Oh,
yes, indeed there is.
And dance also represents certain joy of life, too.
Yes, and dance is associated. The difficulty is that witchcraft is often thought to be so greatly involved in fertility rites, but these fertility rites were not the fertility rites of the human beings. It was for the survival of crops, to see people through winters when there were no refrigerators.
Yes.
A very different thing.
The thing about witches, the word, The Jackdaw and the Witch is your recent book, available, Prentice Hall Publishers, deals with this a little divining bird, the jackdaw,
yes,
and how you met it. Is that it?
Yes, and it also is the special relationship between my youngest son, Julian, and this bird. But also there's a great deal I think, of magic and philosophy in the book. Although it's a book for all ages, the publishers could not say this was a book for children, it wasn't a book for adults. It had this mystical quality. But beyond it all, there's the study of how the bird goes into all sections of society and can say things that no human being can say. But he says many things that a witch could say. And he was known to go to the coven meetings and newspaper...
A coven meeting?
Yes, that is
coven is a gathering.
A gathering of witches, yes, the authentic gathering. And newspaper reporters from all over the world have always said, is Mr. Hotfoot Jackson, or isn't
Jackson
he...
is the Jackdaw.
Yes, or isn't he a familiar? And even at the end of the book, I think the reader is left with this question. Not quite sure, but one thing they are sure about is that this bird is no ordinary bird.
You know, since you used the word familiar, perhaps we should talk about this a bit. The Jackdaw is a familiar. We hear talk, reading, legends, stories about the old woman and her cat familiar. We know during the difficult time old ladies were having in colonial New England, many of them lived with cats. And a familiar is what then?
Well, a familiar is the pet of a witch who can communicate with her, and perhaps is slightly misunderstood by neighbours who cannot communicate with it. But you know, how many people do you know who say, I talk to my dog, or my dog understands every word that I say? It's perhaps not so far-fetched to think that the witch, with her extra knowledge, may indeed talk to her familiar or pet.
I wish I could find this little record. It's very simple. It's a man taking tapes in New York City. It's about a simple, lonely little old lady living, I think a pensioner, living with a little dog. And she's describing her little dog, and the little dog could answer questions, just loneliness. Like, and the little dog could open the jar of preserves, the little dog would dance around the roof, and the little dog died, and she was lonely. But suddenly it occurred to me that she, in a sense, could be very informally a witch. That is, there was an understanding of her and the dog because they lived together so long.
There's a rapport. Yeah. And it's not surprising that in ordinary life, when you have the pets who can do these things, that with the witch's pet, with the extra knowledge she has, and the choice of the pet, something unusual could happen.
Of the familiar than the subhuman. Perhaps you shouldn't use the word subhuman. The non-human.
The elemental.
Humans are kind of subhuman.
Yes, I didn't say where's the division.
But
the elemental spirit.
The cat is relatively new. Then you said the cat is a familiar.
Yes, and you know, the time when witchcraft went underground in the Middle Ages, it was a time when, after living in peaceful coexistence with the newly established Christian church, the new church suddenly decided to go into politics and was not content with a spiritual approach to religion. And this was the conflict. It was not a conflict of heresy, as many people think. It was a conflict of money, because the witches had money and land. And when a witch was denounced, the church could take the land.
This is a very fascinating
point. But also, just at this particular time, a new animal, domestic animal, was introduced into Europe, and this was the cat. It wasn't even a black cat. It was a striped, marmalade type of cat, rather wild-looking, and was not completely domesticated, was not completely understood, and had a cat has a slightly peculiar look about the eyes, any cat. And so anything that was a little difficult to understand was lumped on the other side of evil with the witches. So the cat went along with the witches.
The matter of the stranger or the strange creature.
Yes, the strange creature.
Being the enemy.
Yes.
When we come back to this again.
Because society doesn't really love itself. It loves the people who are going along the same route. And you know, there's a wonderful, wonderful piece of poetry by Thoreau, the Massachusetts poet, Beat of Another Drum. Do you know this?
Listen to the sound of a different drummer.
Yes. If he is out of step with you, maybe he is hearing the beat of another drum. And I think this is so true. I love this. I haven't got the context exactly right, but I know the feeling of it in my inside.
In a sense, was witch-hunted himself. He had to spend time in jail for not paying taxes for a war considered unjust in the Mexican War.
No, I think if only we had a little tolerance in anything. I'm no evangelist for witchcraft. I don't really care about other people. All I do care about is that their minds are not clamped in, unable to receive knowledge, which they may not think about things they don't understand, but if only they try to understand, they don't have to accept. All they need to do is just widen their own horizons a little.
The part that interests me, well, all of it does, but one part particularly, Miss Leek, Sybil Leek, is that you say that it's not a cop-out. That is, even though you believe in reincarnation, you speak of now, this time on Earth, this world, this life, being a very rich and full one. Too. It's not a question of saying, oh, don't worry about it now, there'll be pie in the sky.
No, I don't believe in pie in the sky. I do not believe that any religion should offer bribery in the intangible future at all. And this, again, is the changeover from witchcraft into the old religion, as we call it, into the new. The time of witchcraft, there was an air of happiness, of being personally involved with living and not being ashamed about it. It was a time when sex and love was talked about quite freely, because this was the life force, and there was nothing indecent about it. It was a matriarchal system. The woman was revered as never before, really. You know, Vestal virgin didn't just mean somebody in a temple. A virgin in those days meant a woman who was sufficiently mentally well and adjusted to be able to choose her own husband at a time when other people didn't. And then suddenly we get a changeover with religion bringing the most terrifying concepts into it, and always the personification of death there.
So it's really a sort of you're not too far removed from a man named Norman Noel Brown.
No.
This book,
No.
you know, I think it's about repressiveness. The witch then is anti-repressiveness.
Certainly. I think that in this life we should still see there is a tremendous life force, a surge going on. Why not be part of it? Why not enjoy it?
And with the new energy in the world, you see something quite rather interesting here, with the new form of energy in the world,
yes.
Atomic energy.
Atomic energy.
And then surely you're talking about a life energy that can match it too, perhaps
yes.
never before.
And this, as science finds out these old, new forms of energy, so we, with our living energy, must know more about the energy we are generating, because this is indestructible. We are as indestructible with our energy as the atomic power.
So even though you may subscribe to the theory of reincarnation, I may not. We both subscribe to that life itself on Earth.
Yes, certainly.
Pretty rich.
And get up and each day, let it be a joyous, adventurous one. And witches have a tremendous zest for living. I never realized this until the last 5 years, that everyone I know all over the world has this zest for living. And, you know, there is something about it. It does keep you feeling young.
You have met Madeline Murray. You know,
oh, yes, yes.
And she has her own... One day soon we'll have Madeline Murray on this program. And she's talking about the matter of zest for living.
Yes, we had a long discussion.
Rather interesting. Neither of you is a traditional religionist.
Not
at all. Rather interesting.
Not at all.
Being, on the contrary,
yes.
An atheist, avowedly, and you are being a member of the religion known as witchcraft.
She is not an atheist. She may think she is an atheist, but she...
Quite all right.
Yes.
No, I don't think it matters.
No, I don't think it matters. But basically, we have we have talked about this far into the night. That I have a spiritual awareness, which she will deny, and then give a sentence that we're both on the same line.
But what you both possess, obviously, is a zest for this life here now on Earth. Which is
certainly. It is very wrong to forgo it.
Questions. I'm about to say Dame Sybil, I think it was Sybil Thorndike, Dame Sybil Leek, our witch guest. The book, by the way, that seems to be a rather fascinating one indeed, an endearing one. At the same time, has its own kind of approach, the Jackdaw and the Witch.
Yes. True
fable. It's Prentice Hall. How far it goes back? We're thinking the phrase "witch doctor." The phrase itself. We know that in China today, among old Chinese, there's new medicine, of course. Yes, for old Chinese people, they still retain some of the herb, some of the herb practitioners.
And have you noticed how in modern medicine, so many people are suddenly discovering things like digitalis, which has always been known, foxglove, for heart conditions. It might be something they've just discovered. 10 years ago, I remember the newspapers had great headlines when a doctor said that a woman had produced a child through hypnosis. He had, dandled a watch in front of her. For witches have always known this. A piece of shining metal was all that was ever used in the New Forest with the gypsies, and no woman died in childbirth, and no woman suffered, or, I mean, obviously suffered something at the time of birth, but no woman had terrible complications, and no woman took 9 months of being pampered and petted and feeling ill while she was having a baby. Birth was a wonderful thing. And again, even this morning, you will forgive me if I say this, but I'm still laughing about it because I can't believe that this is the 20th century. I was on a television show this morning, and suddenly somebody has discovered that babies can be breastfed.
What?
Babies can be breastfed.
Someone discovered that.
Somebody has discovered this, and they're advocating it. You know, this is am I in America in the 20th century?
Milk may actually have come from a cow.
And there's a society, you know, to say that this is something that should be done. I didn't know that this wasn't so.
So we're living in an interesting time for
Oh,
witches,
I find it fascinating. You know, I'm so busy exploring the other world and discovering this world that life can't be dull for me.
Well, perhaps before you leave, Sybil Leek, I hope this is the first of a number of visits. I'd like to ask you a great many more questions about witches and this life and this time particularly. What's the message you hear? What do you hear? What have you heard from elsewhere? How will we fare? Oh, Sybil Leek.
Well, I think that man has to discover that he does indeed have a spiritual evolution as well as a material one. Because it's not enough to have, you know, 2 refrigerators, 3 cars. There has to be something else for man. And if he himself can keep pace with the discoveries of science, then he's got something on. Because he too has got to increase, he's got to be better, he's got to be able to cope with the wonders that man and science are producing. And he can only do this by extending his mind, by developing that 9/10 of the mind, which he doesn't even use at the moment, according to Harvard researches.
You know Buckminster Fuller? Does that name ring a bell to you? Buckminster Fuller?
No.
Buckminster Fuller is a designer. He designed the geodesic dome.
Mm-hmm.
He's an engineer and all. He speaks of this very much.
Really?
We have hardly touched human potentialities.
No, we have not. I know this.
We might come back to you after all.
Well, when you're coming back to original forms of feeding babies, anything can happen.
Instead of coming back to original sin, it might come back to your original creativity, which may be more to the point.
Yes, I really believe this, that man has to stretch out and keep pace with the creations of some of the wiser ones, understand them a little more, be able to use them, so that there is an advantage in having this creative art in the broad sense in all forms.
By the way, talking of witches, you spoke of the Western world pretty much. Are there witches in the Orient too?
Most certainly, yes. Mm-hmm.
So there is no,
even in Russia.
there is no Witches International, is there?
Well, it is international because they're all over the world.
But are you perhaps the last question before we speak of the book once more. Is there a sort of a United Nations of witches? There isn't any.
It always has been, because there's always been this grapevine, a secret society which has flourished. Yes, always has been.
I hope one day soon we talk some more, because I think this theme of religion and its origins, that is organized religion and witches, might be a very fascinating.
I think so.
Stuff.
I think so indeed.
Sybil Leek, our guest. Sybil Leek, Witch. And the book is The Jackdaw and the Witch, a True Fable, and it's Prentice Hall, the publishers. Thank you very much. And one day we'll have another talk.
I hope so.
What is happening out there.
Yes, in both worlds.